People ask me sometimes how a man gets quiet. Not shy, not sullen, not broken-looking, not twitching at loud noises, not given to staring at his hands the way some veterans do when they think no one's watching. Just quiet, still. The way a harbor goes still between tides when the water is flat and dark and tells you nothing about what moves beneath it. They ask because they see a man who processes cargo manifests on a frontier transit hub, who eats alone, who has no documented next of kin, who has lived in the same 12-square-meter hold quarter for 4 years without once petitioning for an upgrade, and they think they understand what they're looking at. A man who has given up. A man who is waiting out the clock. They are not entirely wrong. But they are not entirely right either. My name is Devin Marsh. I am 52 years old. I was, for 23 years, a battlefield trauma specialist and close protection operator attached to a series of frontier conflict zones I am not at liberty to name, serving interests I have since come to think of with a clean, measured neutrality that takes some years to develop. I was very good at my work. I do not say that with pride exactly. I say it the way you might say a river is very good at cutting stone. It does what it does. It does it without malice and without glory. It simply does it. The things a battlefield medic learns are not all medical. A battlefield medic learns, for instance, that the human body is both more fragile and more stubborn than any diagram in a training manual suggests. A battlefield medic learns that pain and fear and the proximity of death do something to time, stretch it, compress it, make a single minute feel like a complete and separate life. A battlefield medic learns, if they do the work long enough, that there is a register of attention that switches on under pressure, a kind of focusing of every sense and every capability onto the immediate problem, that is enormously useful, and that, when the pressure is removed, does not always switch off cleanly. I learned all of those things. I also learned to use a range of instruments whose purpose was not saving lives. I became fluent with those as well. By the end of 23 years, I was what you might call broadly capable, in the way that someone who has spent 2 decades in a particular environment becomes fluent in its complete language, the gentle vocabulary and the harsh one both. I put it down when I was 29. Not all at once, it was a kind of gradual laying down, a piece at a time, the way you might set a heavy pack on the ground at the end of a march, item by item, until the pack is empty and you are standing there with your hands free and the whole strange lightness of having nothing to carry. I took the cargo processing position at Kethvarel Station because it required no weapons certification, no psych fitness review, no background check beyond a basic identity verification, and because it was 7 transit jumps from anywhere that had ever heard of me. The station administrator, a Marathi named Devath Ascending who communicated primarily through bureaucratic obstruction, had no interest in who I had been before arriving and considerable interest in whether my certifications for standard mass transit documentation were current. They were. He issued my assignment. I moved in. I processed manifests. I logged weight tolerances. I signed off on hold pressure certifications and interdeck transfer documentation. I ate my meals alone. I slept 8 hours. I did not drink. I did not fight. I was, by any external measure, no one. That was the intention. That was the whole of the intention. I found Teva on a Thursday. This was 14 months before the men from Velkavrath Logistics arrived. 14 months before I had to make a certain accounting of who I was, and who I had chosen to become, and what the distance between those two things actually meant when a child's life was the unit of measurement. On that Thursday, I was running a standard hold pressure audit on Bay 7, cargo container row 9. Kethvarel processes about 12,000 containers per standard week, mostly foodstuffs and biological dry goods headed for the outer spur colonies, and the audit is a solitary kind of work. Just you and a scanner wand and the hiss of recycled air, and the occasional clank of the hull settling against temperature differentials. Bay 7 runs warmer than the adjacent holds because of its proximity to the station's secondary power coupling. And in the afternoon shift, the ambient temperature is close enough to comfortable that the loading crews have been known to take their rest breaks there rather than in the designated crew areas, which is technically a code violation, and which I had ceased flagging after the second time the report was lost. I had been at it for 2 hours and was on row 9 when the scanner flagged an anomalous pressure reading in container 9KETH41, which was listed on the manifest as carrying vacuum-sealed grain concentrate bound for Orth Merle Colony. The container was not sealed. It was latched, which is not the same thing. A latched container holds atmosphere. A sealed container is evacuated for long transit, the interior pressure brought down to near vacuum to prevent organic degradation. 9KETH41 had been logged as sealed by the loading crew 6 hours ago. It was not sealed. This could mean a faulty latch, a manifest error, a loading crew shortcut, or a stowaway. I set down my scanner wand. I looked at the container for a moment. It was a standard mid-size unit, gray-paneled, scuffed along one corner where something had caught it in transit, nothing unusual. The pressure differential was small enough that the discrepancy would not have been caught on a routine manifest check. It had only shown up because I was running the detailed audit, the one that takes 3 hours instead of 40 minutes. I had run the detailed audit that day because the 40-minute check had been scheduled for the morning shift, and I had nothing else in particular to do in the afternoon, and the detailed audit was something to do. Then I popped the latch and opened it. She was sitting in the back corner between 2 stacked crates of grain concentrate, wrapped in a thermal sheet that was not hers. It was standard-issue emergency gear from a survival kit, orange, the kind you find in lifeboat closets throughout the station. She had pulled it around herself like a cloak, and she was sitting completely still with her knees drawn up to her chest and her eyes fixed on the door. And when the door opened, those eyes caught the bay light and they were pale amber, the color of old resin, in a face that was ashen gray and delicate and entirely alien and very, very young. She was Duvari. The ears gave it away, long and tapered and swept back almost flat to the skull, and the gray skin with its faint luminescent undertone, a quality of Duvari skin that I had not seen since the Veil 7 conflict and which I had not expected to see again. She had silver-white hair, fine as fiber thread, cut short or broken short. It had the ragged look of loss rather than choice, the ends uneven, as though the cutting had been done quickly and with something that was not scissors. She was small enough that the thermal sheet covered her entirely when she tucked it close, a small orange bundle with amber eyes and pointed ears, utterly still. She did not cry, she did not scream. She looked at me with those amber eyes and did not move, and we regarded each other for a long moment across the empty space of the container, while the grain crates hummed faintly with cold pack preservation, and the bay lights made everything the color of old bone. The thermal sheet had a station code on it. Bay 4, Lifeboat Closet 2A. She had traveled some distance on the station before ending up in this container. I said in Duvari, which I spoke functionally if not fluently, having learned it the same way I had learned most things about Duvari people, which is to say during a conflict on their world. I said, "You don't have to be afraid of me." She did not answer. "Are you hurt?" Still nothing. The amber eyes tracked me. Not animal fear, something older than that or more complex. Assessment. She was deciding something about me, processing what she was looking at, reading me in the way that Duvari children apparently do when they are very young and very alert, and have been in situations that required them to develop that skill early. "I'm going to close the door for a minute," I said. "Not lock it, just close it so it's only us in here. Then I'm going to sit down on the floor. I'm not going to touch you." I did that. I pulled the container door mostly closed, leaving it unlatched, and I sat down cross-legged on the container floor, 7 feet from her, and I waited. The container was dim with the door closed, only the thin line of bay light coming in around the edge. And in the dimness her eyes were the brightest thing in the space, those pale amber eyes steady and watchful. After 4 minutes she said, in Standard Common, with an accent that placed her in the outer spur dialect region, "You speak Duvari." "A little," I said. "Not many humans do." "No." She was quiet for a moment. The grain crates hummed. Outside I could hear the distant sounds of the bay loading crew running their end-of-shift equipment checks, the pneumatic clank of locking mechanisms, someone calling a count. Ordinary sounds, station sounds, nothing alarming. "I am not a stowaway for the grain colony," she said. "I know. I am trying to get to Kethmerl Station. There is a transit welfare officer there who was assigned to my case." She said this with the careful diction of someone reciting something they have been told to memorize, or that they have told themselves so many times it has achieved that quality. "My case number is DW 7741 Vale." I pulled my manifest tablet and checked the number. It took a moment because the welfare database accessed slowly through the cargo processing terminals, which were not designed for that query type. But the number was real. It was a Duvari welfare resettlement case, opened 14 months ago, currently flagged as active unlocated, meaning the subject of the case was listed as not found. The case file was sparse, as these files often are: a name, a case origin point, an assigned officer, a date opened, a status flag, and almost nothing else. I looked at her, she looked at me. "How long have you been on the station?" I asked. A pause. 11 days. "Living in the containers." "The containers are warm," she said, "and the loading crews do not check them at night." The 11 days of logistics mapped themselves out in my head: which containers, where they had been, how she had moved between holds. It was not a simple route. She had understood the station's flow patterns, the ebb and surge of transit schedules, the hours when holds were empty and when they were not. "The welfare pantry on the second maintenance deck," I said. "The one with the faulty lock on the service access." A very small pause. "Yes." I did not ask anything further about food. I had flagged that pantry twice. It had its uses. "The welfare officer at Kethmerl," I said, "is she someone you know?" "She knew my mother," the child said. I filed that away in the way you learn to file things that cannot be addressed yet. There is a discipline in that, not suppression, just sequencing. The important things wait if you ask them to. You come back to them when you have the shape of the larger picture. "Okay," I said, "here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to document this container as showing a faulty atmospheric seal due to a loading error, which is true as far as it goes, and I'm going to log a maintenance ticket to have it pulled from the transit manifest. That will keep this container off the next departure list for 72 hours, probably longer if I phrase the ticket right. In that time I am going to look at your case file, and I am going to figure out what your options are, and I am going to tell you what I find. You don't have to go anywhere until I do that." She studied me. The amber eyes moved over my face with methodical attention. "Why?" she said. It was a very Duvari question, actually. I had encountered that directness before, not suspicious, not hostile, not the challenge it might have seemed in a different register. Just direct. A genuine inquiry into cause and motive, the kind of question that expects a real answer. "Because you're 11 days into a container with no documentation and a case number that's flagged unlocated," I said. "And because you're small and you have silver hair that's been cut or torn, and you spoke Standard Common to me in the cadence of a phrase you've been practicing, and you need someone to look at the documentation before you end up on a colony transport headed the wrong direction." A very long pause. She pulled the thermal sheet slightly tighter. "Teva," she said finally. "My name is Teva." The case file was not complicated in its facts, but was complicated in its consequences. Her mother had been a transit worker on Vale 3, a deep spur-way station that had been at the center of the Cavathi territorial pressure campaign 14 months prior. When the station had been blockaded and then evacuated, some people had gotten out on welfare transports and some people had not. Teva's mother had been in the second group. Teva had been in the first. A welfare case number had been assigned at the transit point. An officer at Kethmerl had been designated. The transport carrying Teva had been rerouted twice due to blockade lane complications, and Teva had, somewhere in those reroutes, become separated from the welfare group. A gap in documentation, a handoff that had not completed correctly, the kind of administrative dissolution that happens when transit systems are under pressure, and the people who should be watching the small details are watching larger and more urgent ones. She had entered a status, the documentation system, described as active unlocated. She had been moving through the Outer Spur transit network on her own for 11 months. She was, by any reasonable accounting, 7 years old now in standard developmental terms, and she had been doing this for 11 months. I read the file twice. I thought about 11 months. I thought about the distance between Vale 3 and Kethvarel, which was not a direct route even for a transit worker who knew the network. And I thought about what it looked like navigated by a child alone, container by container, way station by way station, keeping the case number memorized like a compass heading. Then I filed the appropriate paperwork to update her status from active unlocated to station present, flagged the welfare officer at Kethmerl for notification, and requested a transit berth assignment for Teva under emergency welfare provisions. I expected this to take 48 hours. It took 6 weeks, which is how long the Kethvarel administration took to acknowledge that they had received my request, at which point they informed me that emergency welfare berth provisions required a designated adult guardian signature, which Teva did not have, and that the welfare officer at Kethmerl had been reassigned following a station restructure, and that her case number was therefore in administrative review and could not be actioned until the review was complete, and that administrative reviews of this type had a standard processing window of 3 to 5 months. I signed as her designated contact. I was not technically authorized to do this. I did it anyway and submitted it through the administrative system, where it sat for another 4 weeks before being returned to me marked insufficient due to lack of documentation of relationship status. By this point, Teva had been sleeping on a cot in the corner of my hold quarter for 2 months. This was not a decision I had made formally. It was a decision that had been made by the accumulation of circumstances, the way most decisions that matter are actually made. The container had not been transit-ready, so she had stayed in it another 3 days while I handled the documentation. On the 4th day, the loading crew had come to clear Bay 7 for a new inbound shipment, and I had moved her, with her thermal sheet and her 2 small possessions, a folded paper square and a Juvari namepiece carved from dark wood, the kind you give to a child when they're born, smooth-worn from handling, and I had moved her to my quarter because it was the only place on this station that was mine to offer. She had looked at the 12-square-meter space, the bunk, the small workstation, the narrow porthole looking out at the dust haze of the planet below, and she had said, "Where will you sleep?" "On the bunk," I said. "I'm putting a partition up. You'll have the aft section." She had considered this with the same methodical attention she applied to everything. "That is acceptable," she had said, with a gravity that was somehow both very young and very old. I built the partition out of storage panels and a length of thermal curtain. It was not elegant, but it was solid. She moved her 2 possessions to the shelf on her side of it and arranged them with a precision that suggested they had been arranged and rearranged many times before, in different spaces, always in the same order. She slept a great deal at first. Not the sleep of illness, but the sleep of something that has been running for a very long time and has only now stopped. She would sleep for 12 hours and then wake and eat whatever I had brought from the station canteen. She had developed a particular interest in a grain and dried fruit ration that was not, strictly speaking, nutritionally ideal for Duvari physiology, but she ate it with the focus of someone who has not always had food in front of them and does not yet fully believe that this supply is permanent. I researched Duvari nutritional requirements and adjusted what I brought accordingly, gradually, without comment. I did not know how to have a child in my space. I had no experience of this. I had lived alone for 4 years, and before that I had lived in a series of postings that were not designed for any kind of civilian domesticity. And before that I had been in conflict zones. And the only children I had interacted with in conflict zones were children who needed medical attention, which is a particular and brutal kind of interaction that does not translate to whatever this was. What I did was what I knew how to do, which was to be consistent and to be clear. I woke at the same time every day. I brought food at the same times. I told her what I was doing and where I was going before I did it. I'm heading to Bay 3 for the morning audit. I'll be back at midshift. And I made sure the information was accurate, because I had a sense that accuracy was important in a way I did not yet fully understand. I answered questions if she asked them, as directly as I could. I did not ask her questions, or not many. I asked the ones I needed to ask: are you in pain? Are you cold? Do you need anything? And I left the rest alone, because I understood that information comes when it's ready. She started talking more around the 3rd week. Not about her mother, not yet, but about the station network, which she had learned with remarkable thoroughness during 11 months of unaccompanied transit. She knew which stations had the best unsecured food stores and which ran honest security checks on their welfare pantries. She knew which cargo routes ran monitored and which had gaps in their tracking. She knew the transit timetables between 17 outer spur stations and could recite departure windows from memory. She knew 3 words of Kavathi that I was fairly confident were obscenities. She was very bright. I do not say that as a doting observation. I say it as a fact, the way you note that a piece of equipment has a higher load tolerance than its spec sheet suggests. She absorbed information quickly, and she organized it with an instinct for hierarchy. She sorted what was important to know from what was background, and she retained the important things with the tenacity of someone who had learned that forgetting the wrong detail had consequences. She had a facility for reading people, for knowing when someone was going to be a problem and when they were not. That was uncommon in someone 7 years old, and spoke to an education in adversity that I did not like to think about too directly. By month 2, she had a routine, which seemed to matter to her. Not because I had imposed one, I had not, but because she had organized the space of each day with the same systematic attention she brought to everything else. She rose early, earlier than me, and I would find her already awake when my alarm sounded, sitting cross-legged on her cot with the namepiece in her hands, turning it slowly, in the particular way a person handles an object that they are not quite looking at. She ate. She went with me to the processing decks on the mornings she had clearance to accompany me. I had filed for a station junior visitor pass under my designation, which was one of the minor administrative achievements of that period. And on the mornings she did not have clearance, she stayed in the quarter and worked. She worked on things I had not asked her to work on. She taught herself the station's internal communications protocols from the public access documentation. She mapped the station's transit flow in a hand-drawn diagram on the back of a maintenance printout, remarkably accurate, that she pinned to the wall on her side of the partition. She spent 2 full days with a station glossary I had downloaded to the quarters terminal, reading it from beginning to end, making notes. I did not ask her what she was preparing for. I had a sense that asking would be the wrong move, not because she would refuse to answer, but because she was already answering it herself, in the way she was spending her time, and that was between her and whatever she was working through. I watched and I let her be. In month 2, there was a difficulty with the station medical bay. Teva had developed a respiratory irritation that was common enough in Duvari, adjusting to a new atmospheric mix, and that was straightforward to treat. But the station's medical bay was staffed by a Marathi clinician named Orath 7 Declining, who had a thorough professional manner and a bureaucratic instinct that put him in direct conflict with every administrative gap I was navigating. He asked for documentation of Teva's station status, her case number, my authority to bring her in for treatment. I gave him the case number. I explained the pending administrative review. I said that I was her designated contact and that she needed treatment. He said he could not administer treatment to an active unlocated individual without a processing authorization from the station administrator. I said, in a register that I controlled carefully, that the station administrator had thus far demonstrated an interest in losing documents related to this case, and that I would be filing the treatment as an emergency medical necessity under my own authorization, and that if he wanted to challenge that filing, he was welcome to do so through the administrative process while I treated her myself. He looked at me for a moment. Then he treated her. He filed a note in her record indicating emergency authorization under designated contact provision, which was not technically an existing provision, but which he apparently decided was better than the alternative. Teva watched this exchange with the focused attention she brought to interpersonal situations. On the walk back to the quarter, she said he was going to say no. Yes, I said. But then he changed. Yes. She considered this. What changed? I thought about how to answer that honestly. He made a calculation, I said, about whether the cost of saying no was higher than the cost of saying yes. And what was the cost of saying no? Me, I said. She turned this over for a few steps. Then she nodded, with a gravity that suggested she was filing it alongside other useful data about how the world worked. She found in month 3 that she could access the station's public transit database through the cargo processing terminals in Bay 7. This was technically a misuse of the terminal, which was authorized for manifest work only. I was the only person who used those terminals, and I looked at the query logs, and I did not file a correction. She was teaching herself outer spur navigation from the transit database, system by system, route by route, building a map in her head that I suspect was already more comprehensive than anything in the station administrator's files. She asked me questions sometimes about transit mechanics, about the logic of route optimization, about why certain lanes ran monitored and others did not. I answered what I knew. When I did not know, I told her so, and we looked it up together, and she retained what she found with the same tenacity she brought to everything. She was building something. I could see the shape of it forming over those months, an understanding of the network, a fluency with its systems, a set of tools she was accumulating with purpose. She did not talk about why. She did not need to. She had a note in her bag that said keep moving toward light, and she was taking that instruction seriously, and the light she was moving toward was on the other end of a transit route she was already learning to read. The administrative review on her case resolved after 4 months. The outcome was a referral to a secondary review, which had a processing window of 2 to 4 months. I did not tell her this immediately. I told her we were still waiting. She nodded and returned to the Bay 7 terminal, where she was annotating a cargo container stacking configuration diagram with what I would later determine was a genuinely more efficient arrangement than our current setup. In month 4, she told me about the folded paper square. She did not announce that she was going to tell me. She simply took it out of her bag one evening, while I was reviewing the next day's manifests, and unfolded it with the careful hands of someone handling something that has been folded and unfolded more times than it was designed for. It was a handwritten note in Duvari. Small, neat script on a scrap of something that was not quite paper, the material used on Vale 3 transit stations for rapid print notes, a gray-brown fiber stock that yellowed with time. She translated it for me, looking at the paper rather than at me, in the careful pronunciation of someone reciting something sacred. I will find you. My name is on you and I will find you. Keep moving toward light. I said nothing. There was nothing to say that was not inadequate, and I have learned over the years that inadequate things said aloud take up space that silence uses better. She folded it back. She put it in her bag. She picked up the diagram she had been working on. Her name is Sira, she said to the diagram. She is a very good transit worker. She knows all the routes. I believe you, I said. We did not speak further of it that evening. But I started, that night, making inquiries through channels I will not detail here, into the status of 47 individuals whose records from Veil 3 evacuation had been classified as outcome unknown. The men from Velcavreth Logistics arrived on a Tuesday, 14 months after I had found Teva. There were 3 of them. They wore the gray and gold livery of a mid-tier freight brokerage, the kind of company that operates in the spaces between documentation systems, in the interstices of compact law, with the particular fluency of long practice. I knew them before they said a word. I had known men exactly like them in other contexts, doing other varieties of the same work, in the same postures of easy professional authority. The lead one was Cavathi, blue-gray skin, the heavy orbital ridges of the eastern subspecies, hands flat on my counter with a calm deliberateness that was itself a kind of communication. He put a document on the counter and said that they were here to process an inventory transfer. The document was a Cavathi-registered commercial asset claim on an individual identified as unregistered minor, transit status active unlocated, case number DW 7741 Vale. I looked at the document, I looked at him. This is a welfare case number, I said. The welfare case is attached to an unregistered transit minor, the lead one said. Unregistered transit minors fall under the Outer Spur Commerce Compact, Article 14, which permits commercial asset registration of unaffiliated persons in active unlocated status when no documented guardian relationship exists. He said this with the flat ease of someone who has said it many times, who knows the responses, who has already processed the likely countermoves and has found them wanting. I'm the designated contact on that case, I said. A designated contact is not a documented guardian relationship under compact law, he said. He was not wrong. A designated contact is an administrative flag. It is not a wardship, not a compact protection filing, not a recognized guardianship. It is a name on a form. I'd like to see your commercial registration, I said. He put it on the counter. It was real. Velcavreth Logistics was a legally registered entity operating under a valid Cavathi commercial charter. Article 14 of the Outer Spur Commerce Compact was, in fact, real law, even if it was law that had been written with other intentions and had over time been found useful for this. I needed to think. I needed time. I need to verify the case file, I said. Give me 48 hours. The lead one looked at me the way his type looks at people. A quick economic calculation. Is there cost to waiting? Is there risk in not waiting? What does this person represent as an obstacle? You have until 1800 tomorrow, he said. After that, we'll file a station access petition and process the transfer through the docking authority. They left. I watched them go, the easy walk, the unhurried certainty of people who do this for a living and who know how the terrain runs. I sent Teva one line on her communicator, stay in the quarter, lock the door, I'll explain tonight. Then I started making calls. I called the welfare office at Kethmerl. Secondary review cannot be actioned. I called the station administrator. Would not intervene in a valid commercial compact claim without a competing legal filing. I called the Transit Authority's Welfare Division and waited on hold for 45 minutes, and reached a duty officer who told me that a compact protection filing would supersede the commercial claim, but required a documented guardian relationship. Who has the authority to co-sign a compact protection filing on the station? I said. A pause. The station administrator, or a commissioned welfare officer. The station administrator would not intervene. There was no commissioned welfare officer on Keth Varel. I sat with this. The station hummed. Through my quarters porthole, the secondary sun was going down behind the planet's limb, turning the dust haze deep amber and rust. At 2200, I put Teva to bed. She went without argument, the way she always did. She had never, in 14 months, given me a night of difficulty, which I attributed to temperament, and to the fact that children who have lived rough understand the value of sleep, with an immediacy that comfortable children do not have reason to develop. She said from behind the partition, "Devin, the lock on the door, is it a good lock?" "Yes," I said. A pause. "Okay," she said. At 22:15, I went to the storage unit under my bunk. I had one case there, 40 centimeters by 25 by 10, sealed with a biometric lock I had not opened in 4 years. I sat in front of it for a while. Then I opened it. Inside was a compact communications array with outer spur encryption capability, a set of documentation tools I will not describe, and a contact index 11 years out of date. I started at the beginning and worked through them, and by 0100 I had found 3 that were still valid. The first was a man named Orith who worked transit security on a mid-spur station and who owed me a favor from 11 years ago that I had held against a day I had hoped would never come. I called him. He answered, which surprised me slightly. I told him what I needed. He was quiet for a long moment. "That's a big ask," he said. "I know." "Give me 6 hours," he said. The second contact was a woman in outer spur compact law who did not know me but knew people who knew me. I explained the specific legal mechanism I needed. She was quiet. "What existing relationship?" she said, when I explained the post hoc reclassification theory. 14 months of station records, I said, food requisitions, medical records, communicator account, 47 administrative filings on her welfare case, transit database access logs from the cargo processing terminals. A pause. Is there anything unusual in the records? Anything that would distinguish it from simple cohabitation? I thought about the manifest printouts with the cargo stacking diagrams on the back. I thought about the Duvari nutritional requirement research I had filed in the station medical database under a general inquiry category. I thought about the 47 filings, the escalating specificity of them, the way they charted a person paying closer and closer attention to a particular case over a long period of time. I thought about the fact that all 47 were filed under my authorization code, and that the duty officer at the welfare division could check that without difficulty. "Yes," I said. "I'll need everything you have," she said. "How long?" "Filing 1 hour. Emergency review 4 to 6. Ruling depends on the duty magistrate." "File it now," I said. She filed it at 0200. At 0500, Orith called back. A transit authority provision, emergency welfare hold, valid while a compact court review was active. The commercial claim could not execute while my filing was pending adjudication. "How long does the hold last?" I said. "Until the ruling." "And if the ruling goes against me?" A pause that told me he had already thought about this. "Then you're out of legal road," he said. I thanked him. I put down the communicator. I sat in the dark of my hold quarter and listened to Teva breathe on the other side of the partition. The slow, even breath of a child who does not know what is happening and who is sleeping without nightmares because in 14 months she has learned, in whatever way children learn these things, that the person on the other side of the partition is going to be there when she wakes up. The station was quiet at this hour. The loading crews had finished their night shift. The manifest queues were running automated. There was only the deep structural hum of the station itself, the ventilation, the power coupling, the distant tick of the hull contracting against the cold of deep space, and Teva's breath, and the particular quality of dark in a 12-square-meter hold quarter at 0200 when you have just filed the last legal move you have. I thought about the 23 years, the careful laying down piece by piece. I had not been dramatic about it. I had not made a ceremony. I had simply stopped doing the things that required those particular capabilities and started doing other things. And I had been deliberate about the geography, 7 transit jumps, no certification trails, a posting that asked nothing of me. The theory had been that enough distance and enough time would make the laying down permanent. Not forgetting, I had never believed you could forget, but a kind of deep shelving. A reclassification. He who I had been filed under inactive. What I had not fully accounted for was that some things cannot be shelved when the circumstances are right. Not because they cannot be controlled. I had controlled them for 4 years without difficulty. But because there are situations where they are the correct response, where they are what the moment calls for, and the recognition of that is not failure and is not regression. It is something more complicated than either. I thought about what I would do if the ruling went against me, what I would have to do. I already knew. I had known since the moment I read the Vel Kavrath document. The knowledge was clean and cold, and I did not flinch from it, and I did not romanticize it. It was simply information about the location of a line and what happened when the line was crossed. The line was a child who was here. The men came the next afternoon, 1745, 15 minutes before their deadline. For this time, the fourth wore no brokerage livery and positioned himself near the corridor junction with the practiced ease of professional coverage. I gave them the filing number. The lead one verified it on his device. The slight recalibration in his posture, barely visible, but I had been reading professional posture for a long time, confirmed that it had landed. "The review will rule against you," he said. "Maybe," I said. "You don't have a documented guardian relationship." "I have a filing arguing that I do," I said. "The court will decide." He looked at me for a long moment. I returned it with the particular quality of stillness I had arrived at over 4 years of Kethvarel Station, which was not, if you were paying the right kind of attention, quite the same thing as the stillness of a man with nothing in him. "We'll wait for the ruling," he said. They filed a counter-response at 1900. I submitted the full documentation record at 2130 when the compact court magistrate requested it. All 47 filings, the medical records, the communicator logs, the food requisitions, the Bay 7 terminal access logs, the nutritional research. The manifest printouts with the cargo stacking diagrams, which I included because they were part of the record, and because I thought they were, in their way, evidence of something that the legal language did not have a precise category for, but that a duty magistrate might recognize anyway, if they were paying attention. Teva ate dinner and asked me what was wrong. "There's an administrative situation I'm working through," I said. She looked at me. "Is it about me?" "Yes," I said. "Are the men in the gray coats going to take me somewhere?" I looked at her, the amber eyes steady and direct, the question without drama. "No," I said. She studied my face with the attention of someone checking a piece of equipment's tolerance, not distrust, just thoroughness. "Okay," she said. She went back to eating. After a moment she said, conversationally, "The tall one by the corridor, he kept his weight on his left side. That means his right side is slower." I looked at her. "I notice things," she said. "Yes," I said, "you do." At 0300 the ruling came. The magistrate found that the documentation record constituted, under compact provision, a functional guardianship relationship requiring formal recognition, and issued a preliminary injunction against the commercial claim pending a full welfare review. The commercial claim was suspended. Velkavrath Logistics had the right to appeal, a minimum 60-day process. I read it twice. I sat with it. Then I went to the storage unit under my bunk and I put back everything I had taken out. I locked it. I sat on the floor of my hold quarter in the dark with my back against the bunk and my hands on my knees, and I thought about things I do not generally allow myself to think about directly. About the specific sequence of actions I had planned. About how precisely I had mapped it. About how, sitting there with the ruling in front of me, I was aware of a thing that was not quite relief. Relief was too simple for what it was, but was related to it, in the way that coming back from a very far distance is related to arriving somewhere. The appeal process ran 63 days. Velkavrath Logistics withdrew it on day 63 without explanation. I had a theory involving a contact from my array, a series of suggestions made to people in positions to make certain kinds of business calculations, and the particular timing of a Galactic Council review of Kavath-Duvari relations that made a high-profile compact challenge involving a Duvari resettlement child into the kind of business decision that requires very careful consideration. I never confirmed this theory. I was not required to. The welfare case came out of secondary review on day 71. The new welfare officer at Kethmerl reviewed the full file and the preliminary injunction and my 47 filings, and issued a determination that the documentation supported a formal wardship filing, which she co-signed. The wardship was registered on day 81. I told Teva what it meant in plain terms. She listened to the whole of it without interruption, then asked if she could show me the final revision of the Bay 7 configuration diagram. Yes, I said. She had solved the Row 9 problem. I submitted the configuration to the station administrator the next morning, attributed to the station's operational review. It was implemented 3 weeks later without any acknowledgement of its origin, which was entirely characteristic of the station administrator and which I did not mind. I want to be careful about what I say happened in those days and what I do not say. I did not become a different person. I did not discover a capacity for warmth I had mislaid over 23 years of close protection work and combat medicine. I am not a man who undergoes transformations. I am a man who pays attention to what is in front of him and responds to it with the tools he has. What changed was what was in front of me. That is all, but that is not nothing. There are things that matter and things that do not, and for a long time I had organized my life around the things that did not, which seemed safer than the alternative, safer for the things I might damage, safer for the person I was trying to become by degrees, safer in the measured way that a man who has been very capable at causing harm calculates the safety of everything around him. And then a Thursday came, and a cargo container with a faulty latch, and a child with amber eyes who did not scream, and the calculation changed. I am not trying to make anything clean that is not. I have done things in the years before Kethvarel Station that do not resolve. I am not trying to cancel them. I am trying to be what I am now, which is a cargo processor who has a ward with silver-white hair who can optimize container configurations, and who is teaching herself outer spur navigation with a systematic thoroughness that will, I think, take her considerably further than this station. I am also, still, the man I was before. I know this with the cold, level clarity of someone who sat in front of a storage case at 0200 and knew without hesitation what was in it and what he would use it for. That part does not dissolve. It is not meant to dissolve. It is part of what I am, the weight under the stillness, the harbor that is not empty even when it looks it. A river is good at cutting stone. The river does not stop being a river because it finds something worth protecting rather than wearing down. The difference is what it is pointed at. The matter of Teva's mother took 14 more months and ended in a way that was neither the worst outcome nor the best one, a bureaucratic finding, a status determination, a record amended, a fact I had to sit with for some time and file in the way you file things that cannot be changed. I am not going to detail it here. I process it the way I process other things that cannot be undone, steadily, without looking away, and then I go back to work. What I will say is that on the evening the final determination came through, I sat in my hold quarter for a long time with the information in front of me, and at some point Teva came and sat beside me, close enough that her shoulder was against my arm. She did not say anything. I did not say anything. The station hummed around us, and through the porthole the secondary sun was going down behind the planet's limb, turning the dust haze deep amber, the color of her eyes. She took out the folded paper square. She unfolded it the way she always did, with the attention of someone handling something that has been unfolded too many times and needs to last a few more. She read it. She folded it back. She put it in my hand. I looked at it, the gray-brown fiber stock, worn soft at the folds. The small neat Duvari script visible through the back. "Keep it," she said. "You need it more tonight." I looked at her. "I have it memorized," she said. "I have always had it memorized. You can give it back when you don't need it anymore." I do not know what a man says to that. I am not sure there is something to say. I am not sure the kind of quiet that follows that moment is something that requires words, or whether the words would help it or diminish it or do anything at all to the shape of it. I kept the note. I still have it. This is the accounting, then. This is what it costs to put down every weapon and become no one, and what it costs to find in the middle of the nothing that you were never actually no one, that the nothing was a posture, a sensible one, a chosen one, but not the whole truth. The whole truth is that you are what you have always been, all of it, the careful and the capable and the parts that cannot be made clean, and the question is not whether those things are in you but what you point them at. I am 52 years old. I process cargo manifests on Keth Varel Station. I have a ward with silver-white hair who has, as of last week, filed her first formal proposal to the station administrator. A revised interdeck transfer routing plan that would reduce cargo processing time by 11% across the whole station. The administrator's office has not yet responded. I expect they will lose the report. She has already prepared a second copy. She will go considerably further than this station. I know this the way you know certain things, not because of evidence, though the evidence is there, but because you have paid attention for long enough that the shape of a person becomes clear to you, and her shape is one that moves toward light. I will be here when she goes. I will be here when she comes back. That is the whole of it. That is what I have. It is enough.